Welcome to the Think Fitness Life podcast, where we bring the mind, body, and gym together so you can improve your health, increase performance, and live your best life. For more information, visit thinkfitnesslife.com. Here are your hosts, Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie.
I wanted to first talk about kind of the foundations of our body, of our molecular makeup, our structure. And we think of our bodies as like brick houses, and people think of like the gym as layering a brick each day. That is a nice metaphor, but in actuality, if you think about architecture, the way that our bodies work is our structural integrity is because of tension. So it's called a tensegrity structure. So instead of you feeling like we have this base and this platform and we're building on it with brick and brick and brick, it's actually like a bunch of sticks held together by rubber bands, because that's really what we are. We have a bunch of bones, we have skeleton, we have muscle, and it's the fact that we have constant tension. So the fact that I have something pulling me forward, left, right, back, gravity's holding me down, that's what gives my structure integrity. So let's first talk a little bit about our bones, our muscle, and water. So our bones make up about 15% of a person's total weight, and our muscle makes up about 40% of a total person's weight. And then everyone probably knows this statistic: water is about 60% of our body weight. Now, the reason this is so important is because even if you're looking at a pyramid of the foundations of performance, your bottom, your foundation, your rock, so to speak, is nutrition. It's what we eat, it's what we consume, so that our body can be at its optimal strength and sturdiness and structure, right? And then so it can function accordingly. And now, the reason I bring up water and hydration is because all of our cells are going to have some layer of fluid. When I have that fluid appropriately, when I'm at the right levels of hydration, it's going to aid in my performance. It's going to aid in my strength. It's going to aid in better firing through my system. Even something as 3% dehydration can deter an individual or an athlete's performance. Now, the reason that I believe that this is so critical is not only because water is such an important transport molecule in our bodies. Think of our body as like its own little universe. We got to be able to transport things across the system, but you can't compress a liquid. So when I'm worried about structural integrity of my system, and I want strong cells, I want a strong muscle, I want sturdiness and stability in my system, hydration is going to play a crucial role in being able to maintain that tension without compression. Okay. And that's why you can feel yourself when you're dehydrated, you feel yourself collapse versus being able to stand up strong. You lose, you're losing electrolytes as well. So there's probably a lot of other nuances that play a role. But the reason I'm talking about this is because this is an absolute fundamental of strength training. Whether you're trying to lose weight, build muscle, get stronger, perform better in your specific sport, or even rehab. Actually, no, we'll say rehab for because that goes into specifics. You're gonna need to have a foundation of nutrition before we head into getting any results out of the work we do in the gym. But that being said, moving on to beyond the nutrition side, a major fundamental of strength training is mobility. That's why you'll see even the greats that are out there right now. One guy's like Toro Kitty. It's like Torokhity, and then Sonny Webster. These are Olympic lifters who are just talking about mobility because they recognize it's not always a strength problem. That's always people's first thought, but it's absolutely mobility, because so many joints have to collapse in say a squat, and so many joints have to work together in a deadlift. And if my muscles can't work together, then I'm going to get compensation. I'm going to get poor movement patterns. I'm going to add fitness on top of dysfunction. It's a famous Gray Cook quote. But this is why we're talking about strength training and specifically bringing up barbell work, because so many people go into isolation work. They work out their calves, they work out their thighs, they work out their core, they work out their arms, they work out their chest, they work out their back. But rarely do people actually systemically address all those muscles together in one function. So that's why the squat, the deadlift, the clean, the overhead press, the jerk are so beneficial because you're taxing your whole system. Would you like to touch up on that, Eric? We have Eric here, by the way. He's our in-house expert. He has his master's in strength and conditioning, and he has, you see that bookshelf behind him, it's empty because he has all the books on his nightstand next to his bed because the dude literally like eats, sleeps in books all the time. So that's why I have him on here. He's absolutely my ace up my sleeve. He's where I gain all the insight and science behind some of the stuff that we learn in the field or in the gym. And he can better explain some of this stuff in a more in depth way. And I can help kind of dumb it down for myself and others. So yeah, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the fundamentals of strength nutrition in reference to mobility?
So nutrition first is the big one because I think many people miss this. I love that you bring up water because it doesn't it hydrates us, but water is more important for cell function and to create energy. A lot of people miss this, especially I even think some of my interns like you need water to break an ATP bond. Hence, if you have less water, you have less bonds breaking, along with other things, to pull fluid into cells, to take things away, to take metabolites away. Like that's the most important thing. And when you decrease water, because you're losing it because you're sweating, you also are losing electrolytes. Those play an important role of firing balance from electrical standpoints for your heart to beat to your brain sense to all this. Like that's why water is very important. I think it's great that you bring it up because I think people just are like, oh well, I just drink a bunch of water. Well, on the flip side, now we're seeing a lot of supplements with hydration focus. A lot of these these new, I hate to say it, Pedialyte with the gym bros, like they think that drinking Pedialyte is going to help restore their electrolytes. Yeah, it will, but it's not the best. But I think that's more predictive of, hey, this is going to improve performance than just say like, if we're lifting, right? If you're taking a intra workout supplement that might be more potassium, sodium favorable with water, it's probably better than some other pre-workout, right? Because like you're keeping hydrated and there's specific hydration levels that you need to hit every 20 minutes to make sure that your performances keep going. And usually it's 8 ounces every 20 minutes, depending on your sweat rate, depending on the temperature outside. But that's very key to increase performance. Now, on the other side, nutrition is, we're building a system. It's people think nutrition of fats, carbs, protein. I always kind of look at it more as if you're training, especially strength training, you need to rebuild the tendons, the muscles, the ligaments that you've just worked, your bones. When you put weight on, it signals your bones to say, hey, I need to be able to hold this next time. I need to grow. And what you put in your body next is going to be the building blocks of that. The same concept as you're building a house. If I'm building a house, am I going to show up with a sectional couch before the walls are even put up? And I think that's what people do sometimes when they come to nutrition. When it comes to strength training, they're like, well, I'm having all these protein shakes and doing all this creatine and all this other stuff. And I'm like, well, what's your base hydration status? What's the rest of your system look like? Are you putting in carbs for glycogen synthesis? All that stuff. Usually people aren't doing that and they're going with the supplement route first, but the supplements aren't going to work unless you have the walls built on your house. So nutrition is
Well,
a very key aspect.
absolutely, and that's usually what's promoted to us, right? That's usually what we're sold on when we're in that kind of desperation state. I mean, it's really sad, but I hate the supplement industry. I hate how much is pushed on people and promoted to people and not educated on bioavailability or the reality of how their body's actually processing things when it's in a powder form versus when it's in its real food form and you bite into it because digestion starts in the mouth and enzyme production starts in the mouth. So when you start actually eating food again, versus just all these proteins and pills, you're going to actually get benefits from the stuff you're eating versus like anywhere from 15 to 30% absorption. You're essentially with supplements, you're making really expensive stool. And, you're being sold by this pie in the sky idea that, you need these things in order for your body to operate. And the fact of the matter is, you don't. There's so many ways that you can get what you need without needing to buy their product. But that's how our society rolls, where we're much driven by desire or lack of what we have, and it's one of the largest money makers in the fitness industry is the supplement side of things.
Mhm.
And I think a major thing I just want to add on to what Eric's talking about muscles, ligaments, tendon. That's the reason. That's another point for why mobility is so important, because if I have poor mobility to a certain area, if I have really bad tightness or restrictions in a certain area, it means I have terrible blood flow. And if I have terrible blood flow through each one of those pathways to my bone, to my ligaments, to my tendons, to my muscles, then I'm not going to repair tissue accordingly, and I'm not going to get new resources in that area to prepare me for the next workout. So that's why it's just another point for mobility, and why that's
Mhm.
another foundational piece and a fundamental to strength training and getting results from the stuff you do in the gym. And again, another reason why you want to break away, if mobility is so important, you want to break away from isolating, because you're going to create compensations in your body. You need to be able to work your whole system together. I think the hands down the best assessment piece for anybody is an overhead squat. If I can watch you do an overhead squat with a dowel or with a barbell, I can right away tell you what's wrong with your system, or how great you are, and you're good to go. And I think that's a good place for people to, if they're in the comfort of their own home, or they're managing their own programs, or they're training their family, whatever. Test your mobility of your system and its ability to handle an overhead squat.
And I start to like not like the word mobility because I think people get it confused with flexibility. And
Mm,
it is a great word, but I think it's get confused because when people think mobility, they're like, oh, well, mobility is more like yoga or Pilates, which yeah, you're correct. But I kind of look at it as mobility is the ability to move through space or a joint through move through its full range of motion to accomplish a task. And we're talking isolation movements, like they are good, but people stay there too much.
mm,
It's the same
mm,
thing where people sit in a chair all day at work. You need to move through full range, full excursion of your full body. Like that's why overhead squat's good because you're moving through shoulder joints, through hip joints, through knee, through ankle to see
ankle,
where the
yep.
limitations are. If you're sitting on a leg press, that leg press is not going to do anything when you're upright walking or running. Like I think that's the other thing that when it comes to strength training, is yeah, machines are good, but there's no translation over into the real world. Like no one's ever going to be sitting on a leg press walking that way. No bicep curls. Yeah, everyone likes bicep curls. We do them, but especially if you're outside the general pop and you're an athlete, like you should not be spending your time here because you're going to actually deter your athletic performance. On the rehab continuum, we see this a lot with ACL patients. They do all this great rehab, but they just spent all their time strengthening quads on a seated leg extension, but their foot's never on the ground. So when they get up to a
Mm,
lunge or a single leg hop, their brain's not ready for it. That's why things like you mentioned earlier, full body movements, jumping, squatting, deadlifting, any sort of clean variation is the best thing that you can do or to learn, whether general pop or athlete, to have your system start to integrate what your hands, your arms, your feet, your legs are all doing at the same time, because that's what walking is. That's what running is. That's what, bending down to pick up laundry, a child is. It's all movement at the same time. And I think the industry has gotten very used to that because of people like Arnold and the bodybuilders. Over the years, they saw you can get really big on machines, but it's at the end of the day, remember they were on steroids and all these other drugs, but it's not like optimal for function.
No, because I mean, if we're talking about bodybuilding, there's definitely an inverse relationship to bodybuilding and longevity. Now, don't get me wrong, they still look great, and if that's your overall goal to just, get as big as possible, have at it. But usually that leads people to go down a road where they're also injecting synthetic hormones, and we know how that plays a role in basically accelerating growth, which also accelerates the growth of precancerous cells and cancerous cells and other damaging cells. It's not the best for longevity. It's not even the best for performance. We've definitely seen over the years of how strength athletes and Olympic athletes in general can outperform, say, a bodybuilder or even a power lifter.
And that's because they live on a different spectrum. And I think this is
Right.
where the most important thing to go with this next is, bodybuilders live, most of them, some of them have lived in low rep ranges. They live in high rep ranges. So they're going to
Hypertrophy.
live in 10 plus reps. Their goal is to put on the most hypertrophy size as possible, right? And they're mainly targeting over the course type 1 muscle fibers. And then you have on the flip side, you have like people like Olympic lifters, power lifters. They're on the more type 2 fiber training types because they're moving weight really, really fast or really, really heavy. And you're seeing the same, a different kind of hypertrophy, but the mechanisms are different. That's why power lifters and Olympic lifters, some of them can lift more pound per pound than a bodybuilder can. And I think that's the next strength training is what fiber types are you looking to change? Because people don't understand that doing 10 plus reps versus under 10 reps is a completely different road to take.
I would actually argue that powerlifting hits a little bit type 1 muscle fiber as well, just because sometimes when they get to those submaximal weights, those maximal loads, they're actually moving them kind of slow versus like an Olympic lifter who moves with speed throughout everything they do. But that's
So
that's splitting hairs.
everyone's
That's
trying to
splitting
do
hairs a little bit, and we don't
well,
need to
well,
get
no,
into
it's
that.
good because once you get to max load, that's type 2. So there's on the Hennon and size principle, it's either if you're moving lightweight really, really fast, you're in type 2. But if you're moving a maximum amount of weight, that's still type 2 at a slower force. It's still type 2. So they are still type 2, like on the spectrum. Now, of course, they're all fiber types are working at the same time because type 1's more of your aerobic fiber types. Type 2 are your more anaerobic. But depending on what powerlifter is doing, if it's sub max, yeah, they might be depending on the percentage, right? If they're usually over 80% of someone's max, you are in type 2 fiber type training. And that's where we kind of look at for training some athletes on the strength continuum is like 80% or more for type 2. And then when we bring them into more explosive and speed, then I bring them into about 65 to no more than probably 75% of their max. And we're moving weight really fast. That's another type of type 2, which is boom. And that's where Olympic lifters usually stay. Now they kind of bounce back and forth because you might go for cleans and snatches. I'm explosive. Then you do some heavy deadlifting, for 1 or 2 reps or singles or doubles. That's still type 2. And that's how that continuum spins it together. But the speed aspect, powerlifters won't be able to move that fast like Olympic lifters. That's where they lack the ability.
And I would say this in terms of the relationship to performance and longevity is with Olympic lifters, they're constantly working on improving the elasticity of a muscle fiber. And with power lifters, they're constantly trying to improve the stiffness of their muscle fibers. So you can just see some of these powerlifters as they age, they don't have great mobility. Whereas an Olympic lifter, as long as they're still balanced in their programming, they can maintain really good mobility and be able to squat ass to grass, things like that. That I think will play a role later in life for them to have better longevity and better function of their system without like joint pain, things like that. That's just my point I was going to bring up. But
yeah, when it comes to that, look at that, right? So you do have in the general population, we've seen people that are power lifters. Oh, I'm going to come and lift heavy every single day, and they can't find range of motion. And you have the people that are more on the Olympic lifting type. Maybe they don't do those movements, but they have the ability to move through space, and they change their rep ranges up. They change their exercises up. And I think that's where it comes to strength training for general population is people need to lie more on the spectrum of yeah, you can go high reps, you can go low reps, you can go heavyweight, but you can't stay on one end. You can't stay at heavyweight forever because that will beat someone's
Right.
body down to pulp. And your body's
Totally.
right. To handle heavier weight, I just have to be more rigid, rigid, rigid. Power lifters literally just have 3 lifts: deadlift, squat, and bench, and it's all sagittal plane. That's it. That's all their life is. That's not what general people's lives are.
And just to your point, another side of that is in most Olympic lifting programs, a lot of the days are more concentric lifting. There might be some exercises in there that are a little bit of eccentric lifting, but if you look at like a powerlifting program, it's all including eccentrics. You're never just doing like a concentric lift. I mean, there are specific nuances where you might throw that in there once in a while, but more often than not, they're doing a lot of eccentric load throughout their program, throughout their weeks, and eventually it is like a little bit of an overtraining to deconditioning their system for a purpose. It's robbing Paul to pay Peter. So it's robbing their mobility so they can create better stiffness and be able to move that weight. They might still
Right.
be hitting type 2 muscle fibers, but still, when you see someone lifting like a 700-pound deadlift or an 800-pound squat or whatever, they're moving slowly through that the way versus watch an Olympic lifter throw 500 pounds overhead. You have to slow that thing down just so you can see what their body's doing. It happens that. But I wanted to come back to kind of the fundamental side, so we kind of like a step by step progression for people. You know, we talked about nutrition, we talked about mobility. I'd say the next fundamental we'd move into is overload, because if you're eating right, you're hydrated properly, you have good mobility, you're grabbing that barbell for the first time. The next step is to, with good technique, load your system in a way that's going to allow for adaptations and growth and progress. That's the goal, right? Everyone wants to see progress with the time they're spending in their gym, or they want to try to hold on to the progress they have, right? So the only way you do that is overload your system so that your body gets out of homeostasis, gets an allostasis stress level, and it has to adapt to that. And that's how you adjust that homeostatic level. Homeostasis is taking us here, and what we're doing is we're saying you're slowly going up with that homeostatic sine wave up and down. Do you want to talk a little bit more about overload principle?
Yeah, and this is overload. This is the basis of how you keep progressing through any program, any sort of life. We've all done it. If you're old enough or over 18, you've done it in school. Your teachers have done it to you. You just don't realize it from a learning standpoint. But it's overload is just like after 1 week or 2 weeks, you need to increase the stimulus. You need to increase something to change to get a different output. So when it comes to strength training, something very simple is you can either increase reps, you can add a set, you can increase the load, you can still keep the same weight, but move with better form for more of those sets. So let's say if you took 4 sets of 6 at 100 pounds on week 1, so week 2, if you were increasing the load, you would go to 105 for the next, try to get 4 sets or 3 sets. If you didn't increase the load but want to increase the reps, you go up to 7 reps. Then the next week, 8 reps. If you want to increase a set, you go 5 sets of 6. There's multiple ways to increase overload because you're overall increasing efficiency of that movement. And it doesn't always have to be weight. And there's sometimes when people will put weight on bars, and I've done it, where you're like, I'm going to add 5 pounds, try to go every week. And you get that sitting point where like, I've been stuck at one weight for 2 weeks, and then you might see that jump the next couple of weeks, and that's how it goes. But on anything, you need to have that overload. And you see this a lot with runners, not much more, not a lot of strength athletes, because runners, I'm going to say this, novice runners, not advanced runners, because they know how to increase the load and kind of the mileage. But a lot of people will start, oh, I run 3 miles and I do that every day. And I've been doing that for a month. Well, after about a week or two of 3 miles, that 3 miles is not doing anything because your body is using less calories to effectively get that distance, and you're not changing any sort of metabolic capacity. The same thing, if you look at miles as reps and set or total volume lifted strength training, it's the same. So you have to overload the system to increase whatever goals you are, right? You're trying to maintain muscle mass, you're trying to grow muscle mass, lose body fat. You need to have overload to keep your body progressively growing or burning calories to a new stimulus.
The other thing too is with overload, generally speaking, it's about 60 minutes or 25 reps before you're going to gas your nervous system and you can possibly decondition your system. You can make yourself worse. So I think that's another thing to think about when you're thinking about your barbell work, you're thinking about your program is 60 minutes. Like as soon as you touch that barbell, that timer's ticking, and 25 quality reps at a, 50 to 80% of your one rep max, so to speak, for creating an adaptation.
Mhm.
Everyone wants to just kind of overload their system every time they get into the gym. Law of diminishing returns will tell us that that won't work. That's going to eventually lead us to getting worse and worse performance. So if we want to overload our system, we want to overload it properly. We want to shoot for about 25 quality reps in a movement in order to get better at it. And then we want to think about the next step, and it's another fundamental of strength training, but they kind of go hand in hand: overload and then periodization. And we talked, people like linear periodization, especially in the beginning, of just maybe adding 5 pounds to their main lift every week. Sure, you can do that in the beginning, absolutely, until you get to a point where you're starting to plateau. And then you want to get into what we talk about on this channel, which is called undulating periodization. It's like the stock market, right? Check your favorite stocks or whatever, your portfolio. It's progress is non-linear. Everything goes up and down, but the goal is that growth overall has been happening. So I love the stock market. It's a great example because it goes up and down every single day, every single hour. But if you look at the last 150 years, it's been an average of like a 6% or 9%, somewhere between 6 and 9% growth overall in the last 150 years. So you've seen it go up, you've seen it go down, you've seen big spikes up and down, but the general trend is that there's been a growth pattern when you zoom out. That's the same thing with the way we periodize so we can overload our system in a safe way so that we're layering ourselves to get better and better throughout the weeks. So undulated periodization, just to kind of briefly give an example of it, would be, say you're doing an exercise, you do like 60 to 70% of your one rep max week one. Week two, you're going from 65 to 75. Week three, you're going from 55 to 65. And week four, you're going from 75 to 90 plus. And that's the idea.
Well, if Matt just froze, what he's saying is you're continuing undulating, so you're varying. And like the stock market system, I like how he mentioned. I was talking to a client about this the other day. If you want to play it safe, this is you put money into a fund that's going to grow slowly over time. You do slow progress, more linear. You kind of go from high reps to low reps over 12 months. Where undulating is if you put it into the stock market, highs and lows, you can get greater return, but there's a little bit more risk involved because of the weights being used, right? And that's kind of how I look at strength training, is that return of investment. If you want to get a good return of investment, you're going to have to go and lift some heavy weights for some lower reps very often to get those bigger returns. Yes, there's more risk because the weight is heavier, but you're still training the system to your goal. And when it comes to strength training, everyone has goals. And if you don't have goals, you can always, message us and chat us to see what your goals are, where they might be, and how we can help you out with them. But if you have a goal to put on as much muscle mass as possible, you're going to lift some heavy weights, and then you're going to go into more volume work. I know he said for the big lifts like the squat, the deadlifts, the benches, the cleans. So you're going to go into a 25 rep maximum for quality at low reps. And this is probably going to be 6 reps or less on the spectrum. Now, if you're going to go for more hypertrophy, more growth, then you can start ramping it up at midway through the session. If you want to do some, like, you're going to get some return, but it's not going to be as quick. Where if you go into more of the strength training from 3 to 6 reps, undulating, you're going to get more return of investments quicker because you're using heavier loads. And depending on the person's goal, where they want to go, that's what's going to determine what avenue of strength training to use, right? So it's this, do I want to gain a lot of hypertrophy? We can start talking about, I don't like the word bodybuilding, but like if you want to get hypertrophy and grow muscle mass, you still want to train with heavy loads. Like I think people get confused that they're like, oh, well, I need to do, on the squat sets at 10 to 12. Yeah, been there, done that. It does work, but you don't get stronger. And going back to type 2 fiber types are 50% more adaptable than type 1. So eventually the type 1s get maxed out and we get fatigued. The body has to start pulling in type 2, but it's not quality type 2. So if you're looking to put on a lot of muscle mass at the beginning of a session, you can hit those 5x5, 4x6, up to 25 reps. Then you can do higher volume. You can go on a dumbbell pullover 4x12. You can go bicep curls 4x25. Then you can ramp up the volume on some of the small accessory muscles. But on the training aspect of it, it's not this what we said at the beginning. You're not training isolation. You're not going in, hey, I'm going to start with leg press, 4 sets of 15. Like you're just not going to get as much out of it as if you would take a dumbbell or a barbell and say, hey, I'm going to do heavy squats. Then I'm going to do some sort of heavy pressing. Then I can go 4 sets of 15 on the leg press. That's fine. But it's to go right into isolation work. It's not as much of a return of investment as people think. Now, even from a caloric burning standpoint, the more you can get off of benches in seated machines, the more calories you're going to burn, because we talked about, right, the biotensegrity of a system. Like it needs to keep us together. If you're sitting on a chest fly and just doing this, well, my abs don't need to work. My glutes don't need to work to stabilize. Like they're not doing anything. Where if I'm on a cable standing in a stagger stance, that's a whole different exercise. And it's a better exercise for you than seated down. And yes, you're not going to move as much weight. At the end of the day, no one really cares, because if you can isolate more muscles and function together, you're actually going to be more efficient and then eventually put more size on. And I think that's where a lot of people get misled. And you and I have seen this, especially at the big box gyms where, in fairness, people don't know better. I think that's why we're out here doing these. So people understand that, if you open up a magazine, Men in Health, yes, the workouts are good, 4 sets of 10 on a bench press, 4 sets of 10 on chest flies, 4 sets of whatever. That's okay, but it's not the most efficient way to work out. And a lot of times, most of those guys that are in those magazines also don't work out like that. Like CrossFitters, we know this. They don't do WODs every day. The good ones, they train one day, one session like Olympic lifters. They train snatch progressions, clean progressions, jerk progressions. Then they can still build up to what they need to. Then later in the day, they do their conditioning portion of it. But when we get into this generalized general public, I think people think like, oh, well, they must be doing this WOD where I just, tossed 50 med balls and did, 30 cals on the aerobic bike. And then you change it up the next time. Well, there's no overload there because you're changing the complete program. And the same thing when it comes to strength training. Stick to a program long enough, it will work. Now, eventually you have to change, but 4 or 5 weeks on the same exercise, same program for beginners in general pop is usually what is recommended. And how our programs go, some even go 6 to 8 weeks. If you really want to keep hypertrophy, like those first 3 weeks, it's more of a neural adaptation. Your body's just sending that signal to gain strength, and then it will start layering the protein fibers in to build more size and more strength. That's why people like you and I, to get good at cleaning and Olympic lifting, you have to do it, and you can do it almost every day of the week, just not at a high intensity. And I think people get used to switching things around too much. Oh, well, this day I did squats and I haven't squatted in 3 weeks because I changed the exercise. Stick with something consistent. Be consistent if you're brand new to this. Now, if you're not and you've been doing this for a while, now you can really have fun and start pulling in a lot of undulating, where I might squat heavy on Monday, but Thursday I squat light and move weight faster. That's the dynamics that you eventually want to get to.
And with this kind of, Eric's kind of touching on it already, the kind of the next and basically the last fundamental of strength training is specificity. And that's kind of what Eric was talking about in different examples of like, what's your goal? What are you trying to get better at? What are you trying to improve? And that's where you would kind of change the nuances of your program based on the specificity of what outcome you're looking for. It's back to kind of one of the 7 habits of highly successful people by Stephen Covey. He said, always start something with the end goal in mind. So if you're going to start a program, what's your end goal? What are you trying to get out of it? And that's where the specificity comes in, so you can incorporate, your mobility overload principle and your periodization, so that everything you're doing in your programs and your weeks is leading you to that end goal, that outcome that you're looking for. And maybe that specificity changes from one program to the next. That's great. That's a good thing to have.
Yeah.
And that's why we like doing like 4-week programs, so that you can adjust these things and always be on a track towards that specific goal, that specific outcome you're looking for. And what's funny is the last fundamental of strength training brings us back to nutrition. It's rest and recovery. So if we go top down, nutrition, mobility, overload, periodization, specificity, which we just talked a little bit about, and then rest and recovery, and you're back to the top again. Rest, sleep, time away from the gym, recovering, letting the body repair, replenish glycogen, repair muscle fibers, things like, and then back to the nutrition to be that good fundamental for your next workout again. And you can think about these in a micro level for each individual workout. And you can think of them in a macro level for your entirety of your program as well.
Right, because a lot of people, and they miss the recovery part of it, because you can train all you want. Now, yeah, you can detrain and you can overload and you can start overtraining, which very rarely happens.
Right.
But it can happen.
But real quick, I want to make a note really quick. It's usually the people who have barely begun their program, or who have worked out for maybe a couple days a week, but inconsistently, who are always asking me about, well, can I work out too much? And I'm like, trust me, we'll worry about that when we get there, but you are far away from working out too much. So just think about that for a second. It's usually the people who aren't working very, very much at all who are wondering if they're working out too much. It's a little bit of their.
Yeah, and when that happens, when you get into that comfort zone, it changes, because people think it's not because of the workouts. It's usually because they're not recovering enough, and that's the thing. If they're not recovering enough, then their performance decreases. But they blame performance, and usually it's always the recovery, because people aren't getting enough protein in, they're not giving enough fluids in, they're not replenishing their glycogen stores enough. That's the whole basis of why nutrition is so important. And people do all this recovery stuff like saunas and ice tanks, which that stuff is great, but sort of like the supplements, if you don't have your nutrition under control first, that stuff's not really going to help, because the system runs off of recovery from a nutrient standpoint. And that's the biggest driver of performance, is if you can have quality lean body mass and function as that, then it's the most important, right? So as we start to finish up and talk about strength training, remember, you're going to want to train hard, you're going to want to train heavy, but you need to have good recovery nutrition so you can keep going, because we only really train for an hour a day, and you have 23 hours to build the rest of the system up and to recover from the damage you just did. And that's the most important thing, which if you don't recover enough or get enough food in, that's what leads to these overtraining symptoms, right? You start wearing down, you feel tired, lethargic, because your body's telling you, hey, I don't have the fuel in the muscles, or I don't have the stamina, the strength, because you didn't give me what you need to build. Then it's going to collapse, right? Same thing, the house analogy. If I start busting down walls with a sledgehammer and I start trying to build a house frame, but I'm using poor 2x4s and not reinforcing them with like nails and other things, eventually it's just going to collapse. And that's what people do to the body, and they really miss out on the recovery from an eating standpoint. So strength training is very important in all aspects, and everyone should be strength training because of our system, how it works, to keep us upright, to keep good posture, to keep blood flow moving. Muscles pump blood, they drain lymphatic systems out. This is all important for overall health and longevity, not just, oh, I want to look good, right? You need these muscles to move and pump and function to get us place to place, to stay out of pain, but also for a metabolic factor to stay healthy. And, if people have questions on strength training, you can always reach out to us. We have a multiple options of resources for programs that we offer, that we compile together. Matt and I very much been doing this for a while and love to program for people. And we have many clients with success stories of how we've gotten them from a point A to a point B in their programmings throughout our monitoring. And that's the biggest thing, is how do we help people go from one end of the spectrum to the other with specific programming and periodization that works for that individual to gain them health, longevity, mobility, strength, and all that to do what they do. And I think Matt's back, so he can kind of take it and wrap it up if he can hear me. If not, I can keep it going.
No, I can hear you. And yeah, just to wrap up again, the fundamentals: nutrition, mobility, overload, periodization, specificity, rest, recovery, which gets us back to nutrition and then all over again. Yeah, I love having Eric on here. I'm so sorry that we had some technical difficulties on YouTube. From now on, we're just going to go to Facebook. It's a lot easier for myself to manage. Apparently, I'm really bad with computers. That's why I'm just like a caveman, and I just pick things up and put them down. The next thing that I'm proud to announce is that we found a way for people to earn entries for our contest for logging workouts, which is the number one most important thing we're trying to do with these contests, is galvanize our community, make people take action. So now we've actually figured out a way so people can go on, submit their workout or a selfie of the aftermath of their workout to our messenger service, and you'll get 50 entries right into a contest. You keep doing that every single day. Not only is it going to help you consistent, it's going to help you get to your goal. It's going to earn you more entries into the contest and possibly win that big grand. And yeah, I'm just really happy that we got that going, because that's, I think, the most important thing of this whole thing is just that people are taking action, people are taking care of themselves, and a healthier individual makes a healthier community. What's good for the hive is what's good for the bee, and what's good for the bee is what's good for the hive. So thank you very much. Matt Gluckman, Eric Menchie here, signing off. Think Fitness Life. We're here for you guys. Mindset, exercise, nutrition. For more information, check out our Facebook group on facebook.com/group/thinkfitnesslife, and you can get all the training resources you need to be on the best path to achieve your goals and live your best life. Have a great week, everybody.
If you're ready to make steps towards improving your health or increasing your performance, book a free 30-minute call today by visiting thinkfitnesslife.com.